The legendary dubstep artist Skrillex is infamous for ruining music. If you remember back when he first came out in those late 2000s, early 2010s with his music, you will remember that many people were very angry at the prospect of music going in this direction. But you cannot deny that even if you never really liked any of those early singles, like Bangarang, for example, his influence has been huge, and the style of music that we've seen shift in the 2010s and beyond has been really part of his style and his doing, really. When you see a lot of tracks, a lot of pop songs really take that more EDM style with the drops and the more dubstep approach that we saw, that was really big in those days. You know, so many artists were doing it, and it's really part of what Skrillex was doing all along. So his influence is kind of mad. Beyond that though, I've never really given his music that much of a chance. I've never really sat down with many of his works and really, you know, delved into what he's doing. I just know him for those early days. I think I did listen to some tracks from Recess back when it came out, but it was a time where I just wasn't really into that style of music. So it's really interesting to see that in 2023 he's dropped an album that is carrying a lot of buzz and hype around it, considering the fact that, you know, his best days or his, you know, best works or his most famous works might even be considered more of a meme that by most people at this point than anything else. I mean, especially when you talk to people who just, you know, casually listen to music, they'll remember those Skrillex tracks, but they don't exactly take them that seriously. So it's interesting to see that this album here is being taken very seriously, and for good reason as well. I think this is actually a really good release from Skrillex. Opening track actually sets the tone really well for the album. I mean, when I first heard this, I was super hyped for what we'd get, because this is a great little cut here. And then Rumble as well was another single, which is another track that just has so much layers and textures behind the instrumental, and the vocals that are just so deep and menacing sounding really adds to the atmosphere of the track too. Now getting more into the deeper cuts on the album though, Ratatata is a really good track. I think Mr. Oizo, I always forget how you say his name, Mr. Oizo I think it is an artist who brings a lot of zaniness to the table whenever he puts out his own music. This track here is full of zaniness and kookiness, and there's other tracks across this album that have that feeling as well. Xena is an easy highlight on this album for me. Good God, this track is mental and reminds me so much of Bauer, who obviously came out at a similar time to Skrillex in that early days of those dubstep drops and things. Of course with Harlem Shake, an artist who probably again isn't taken that seriously by many people, but his album Planets Mad was fantastic, and this track reminds me a lot of that. Those kind of tribalisms that are going on, the Eastern influences that are coming through in the sounds as well. What an excellent song this is. This is an absolute manic release here. Lots of heavy clashes to it, totally different to a track say like Butterflies, who has the feature from Fortet on it, which is cool to hear. A much more melodic track that reminds me honestly more of something like Fred Again would do, which wouldn't surprise me if there is some influence coming through on there as well from Fred Again. Too Bizarre has the Duke sound to it. Love this track with Sway Lee on vocals as well. A match made in heaven, may I add, as well. I did not think you'd see a Sway Lee track that is Duke influenced of all things, and it works so well. His voice is so right at home, right in its right place on this track. There's even a Dylan Brady feature as well with Supersonic, lots of wobbly bass coming through on this track. You don't quite get the Dylan Brady influence coming through as sharply as I'd expect. I would have thought this track might have had a bit more of a clashy sound to it, maybe some weird sort of clashes coming through with the synths and things, something like that you'd expect from Dylan Brady. But of course, you know, folks out here aren't necessarily just one trick pony. But I will say with this album, as much as there are some highlights, although I don't necessarily think Supersonic is a highlight when it is packed with so many great tracks, there is a run of tracks that I don't necessarily find all that enamoring, and it is about this point actually. It's kind of like mid-point of the album through to the last track are lots of tracks that sound okay, Of course, there's the Sway Lee track, which is really good, but they're just kind of fine. They're just kind of so-so. They don't quite leave that impact on me. I will say Inhale Exhale actually is a track that I'm not that impressed by. I find the vocals on this track super repetitive, and it just sounds really mundane. I hate to throw out the word generic, but honestly, this really does sound like anyone could make this kind of thing. And I've heard so much music that sounds like this over the past few years, especially when delving into more electronic sounds that I have been over the past few years. This one just feels pretty ordinary. The dubstep wobbles are really, really welcomed. Of course, you're going to get a lot of that across this album anyway, but aside from that, I don't necessarily find this track particularly to be all that exciting or engaging. And I will say another thing about this album. I don't know what happened since my first listen, but my first listen with this album was an absolute treat, and something about it just hasn't stuck with me, and I wonder if that's something other people out there have felt as well. When I first heard it, it felt really refreshing, it felt really, really exciting, and it is still a good album, don't get me wrong, but with multiple listens later, that spark has just kind of dimmed a little bit, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just the familiarity with the way this album goes in, maybe it's the adventurous feel of the album that doesn't quite hit you the same when you've, you know, explored that adventure multiple times in a row. I don't know what it is, it doesn't quite give me that same rush. Really impressed with the closing track though, which has a Porter Robinson feature on it, which is cool to see. Got that kind of dreamy, atmospheric feel that you'd expect from a Porter track too, while also being backed by a really, really high tempo garage beat, which I really like. So yeah, Skrillex is really coming through with the exciting influences on this album. I mean, so many cool sounds coming together, clashing, making some really memorable moments and some really exciting moments as well. But in terms of repeat listens, I've not been quite as excited with these tracks as I was the first time. Particularly a track like Rumble, I feel, is a good track, but that first listen of that song was great. And then everything after has kind of just been like, yeah, this is cool. I'm not as excited about it now. Which isn't something I tend to get with an album I like a lot on first listen. It's quite a strange thing, that really. But yeah, I'm not sure what it is, but that's where I'm at with this album. I'm still going to go 7 out of 10 though. I think this is a really strong release. There's no denying that it is in fact an absolute adventure and an absolute treat at times as well, with so many cool sounds coming through. Skrillex really delving into some nice genres and exploring some different sounds like the juke and the garage and things like that. Really good to see. So yeah, I'm a fan of this. I'm a big fan of this. I think this is a really strong release. And yeah, definitely check this out. If you were hesitant to because you're not really that fussed on Skrillex or yada yada yada, I wouldn't skip it. I'd give it a listen. I really would, and I think you'd be quite surprised. It's a good album. Thank you for watching as always. Do subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my Patreon as well. Tell me your thoughts in the comments, as I would love to see what you guys think on this. Have a good day. Subscribe. Goodbye.